Okay, I think we're live. Well, hello there, and welcome to Frankie Sense and More. It's the May edition of Going to the Movies with Brent Marchant and your host, Frankie Picasso.
Hey,
Welcome.
Frank. Hi, Frankie. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great, Brent. So we had some really good movies this month.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this is, we're still at the tail end of the time of year when the pickings are kind of slim. But again, thank goodness for streaming because it's really provided access to some really interesting foreign and documentary films, which we're going to be focusing on again this month.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to it. I'm going to show the movie poster of our first movie.
Okay, so our first film today, this one is playing theatrically, and this is a really unexpected treat. It's Renfield, which at least on a surface level looks like it's, just yet another horror film, but the horror aspect is really just kind of a pretext to get you into the story, which has to do more with the idea of self-help and learning how to extricate yourself from toxic codependent relationships. Which, I mean, doing that through a horror film is really brilliant in terms of the way they've incorporated that, especially one that's as funny as this one is. It tells the story of another part of the Dracula franchise, as told from the viewpoint of his personal assistant, Robert Renfield, played by Nicholas Hoult, who has been in Dracula's servitude for a really long time, having made a deal with the devil of sorts with him for immortality. And he's found that whatever the promises that Dracula had made to him just really didn't quite pan out the way he was hoping for. He's sort of become a glorified gopher, responsible for going out and getting Dracula's, daily meal requirements and tending to his little needs and so forth. And he's grown tired of it. He wants to make a change. He feels he's stuck in a toxic codependent relationship. So he joins a support group. And that in itself, I think, is hilarious.
That is hilarious.
Somebody from a horror background joining a support group. When he's there, he finds out very quickly that the way he can extricate himself from this situation is to take back his personal power, which is something he had never really considered, but said, yeah, I can do that. So he begins the process of taking back his personal power. But when his boss finds out about it, he's not happy about it. He feels betrayed. And as a result of it, he decides to start putting the screws to him, especially when Dracula teams up with a organized crime family. And they sort of work in tandem to not only take down Renfield, but also to carry out a plan to essentially rule the world. So this is really a case where Renfield has to prove himself worthy of taking back his power by fighting back aggressively. And thankfully, he's got the help and support of an idealistic police officer who is investigating the death of her father, she believes, at the hands of the police department, which is in cahoots with the crime family. So the two of them are taking on these three very powerful forces together. But if they're going to succeed, they got to make sure that they take back that power fully for themselves.
Yeah. And she's played by Awkwafina, and she is so funny. I love everything she does. Really, I do.
Yeah. And I mean, between her and the performance by Nicolas Cage as Dracula, I mean, he is just hysterical. This is a role that he was born to play, and he's made it his own.
Yeah.
So, basically the way the rest of the story plays out is it's the two of them against the other three forces and seeing if they can succeed at that. Now, I really liked the fact that this was a movie where you took an unlikely subject, self-help, taking back personal power, and putting it in an unlikely setting of a horror film. And because of the whole comic nature of that, the thing that really makes this picture work so well is that it's hilarious. I mean, it's absolutely hilarious. Even when it comes to the vampiric elements to it and the fighting scenes. I mean, they're so over the top that you just can't help but laugh at them while you're watching these things. If you're a really sensitive viewer, okay, you probably want to steer clear of this one. But if you understand that, this is all done in good fun.
It's campy.
And it's campy and it's cheesy, you'll really get a kick out of this. I also like the fact that this movie does its fair share of doing send-ups of the self-help community, where you've got a bunch of people who think that, well, just if I mouth the right words to a mantra or put motivational pictures on my wall,
Mhm.
that's going to give me universal enlightenment. No, it takes a little more than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to be able to have faith in the idea. You got to be able to back it up with action. And you see that with Renfield as he's carrying out his tasks. So this is a great picture. I really enjoyed this a lot. And I'm not, as I said before on here before in some of my writings, I'm typically not a huge fan of horror films.
Yeah.
I mean,
Me either.
if they're campy or if they're of the smart horror genre, okay, then they'll get a break with me. But a lot of the mainstream typical pictures of this
Get
genre,
scared to get scared kind of crap is.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had a lot of them just to be very inane and stupid.
Yeah.
And,
I agree.
yeah.
100%.
I mean, it's not like the old classic horror movies, which were really chilling. These are just like, let's see how we can get the body count,
But
things
you know
like
what?
that.
It's like in today's world, there's enough scary things going on.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
want to go get scared. Really?
Yeah.
I don't get it. Yeah.
And especially since a lot of the mainstream ones that are being released today are slow moving, they're predictable.
Yeah.
And by the time you get to the end of it, it's like, well, there's time I'm not going to get back for myself.
Exactly. Exactly.
But this is one where you really should invest the time, particularly if you have a good sense of humor and you want to see these ideas played out in a very unlikely context. So go see this one. Go enjoy Nicolas Cage's performance again, which is just outstanding. And it's playing in theaters, at least for a little while longer.
Yeah. And you can still rent it at home. It's a little expensive to rent at home. It's probably cheaper to go to the movie theater, but you can get it if you need to.
Exactly. So I would give this one 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's move on then to Juniper.
Yeah, Juniper is a delicious little treat from New Zealand.
I love this movie.
Yeah, I mean, this is the story of the intergenerational relationship between a grandmother and her grandson. The grandmother, who is played by Charlotte Rampling, and probably one of the best performances she's ever given.
I agree.
She's a retired war correspondent who has a tremendous sense for imbibing, particularly in gin. She drinks almost a whole bottle every day. And she goes to New Zealand from England, where she lives, to recover from a serious broken leg. And while she's there, she's entrusted in the care of a nurse and, more importantly, her grandson, who's a 17-year-old recovering from the death of his mother.
Yeah.
And
she looks great.
He barely knows her, and all of a sudden now he's put in a position of being a prime caretaker.
Even his father doesn't know her because she sent him away at 5 years old to boarding school, so they didn't even really have a relationship.
Exactly. And he feels the teenage boy feels very alone because he doesn't really have anybody who he can call upon to get advice or guidance, because the one person he did put that trust in was his mother, and she's now deceased.
Yeah.
But the thing that's interesting is the grandmother and grandson are really, in many ways, very much cut from the same cloth.
Yeah.
And when those sides of themselves begin to be revealed, they end up developing an unexpected bond, and they become really almost like really very good friends. So the story basically follows them in terms of the way that their unusual relationship plays out.
Yeah, it's kind of sad in a way too, because he at that coming of age really, in relationships, and he's had 2-3 relationships, it seemed like, that have ended already in death, and to bring somebody into your world and into your life and to fall in love with them or to love them and then have them leave so soon and suddenly, it's very difficult. I mean, he was suicidal.
Yep.
He felt things deeply.
Well, and the other thing I think that's really important to take away from this film too is it really stresses the need for intergenerational relationships, which is something that's getting harder and harder to come by these days, especially between generations that are separated by a generation in the middle.
Yeah. And
to see them become as tight and as concerned with one another as they are really sends a powerful message. I think that younger people and older people really need to take to heart more than maybe they have in recent years. because they can learn a lot from each other. I mean,
Yeah. And his friends like to hang out with her. Like I thought that they, they enjoyed her company. Yeah, sure, she's a boozer, but they enjoyed her company. She's a straight arrow. She, said things, and she liked to party. I mean, she was a hard living woman. And even, in her state, she still thought about sex. She still thought about relationships. She still, goes, I've got it. I still got it. She's got, broke, like she's in a wheelchair or whatever, but I got it. And I drink I drink a bottle of gin a day, but I got it.
Well, there's one scene in particular where I like, where she asks her grandson, do you have any friends? He goes, well, yeah, I do, but they're mostly a rowdy, drunken lot. And she says, sounds like my kind of people.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So this is a very touching, telling film that I think really needs to be seen, especially for people, again, who are of different generations, and to take it seriously, to understand that we can learn from each other. I mean, she's able to get back a sense of youth that she hasn't had in a while, and he's found that he's not as out there as he thought he was. He's got somebody who is a backer, who's willing to agree with him, who's willing to support him, and saying, reaffirming for him, no, you're not weird, because I'm the same way.
Yeah.
So we'll get along fine as long as we get on, with that front. So I really enjoyed this one. The only criticisms I had about it is that some of the story threads aren't as fully developed as I would have liked, and some of them are also a little bit predictable. But given that, everything else it's got going for it, that's really not too much to have to deal with. Particularly when you're dealing with the incredible performances of Charlotte Rampling and the breakthrough performance of George Fourier as the grandson.
Yeah,
this is a good picture, and I really enjoyed it. I'm glad it's available for streaming, because when it played in theaters here in Chicago, it was here in one theater in the whole region.
Wow.
For 1 week.
Wow. Yeah.
It came and went before I even.
My world.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I really wanted to try to see it when it was still in the theater, and it came and went before I even had a chance.
Yeah.
But thankfully, it came to streaming relatively quickly, and it's available for other people to catch too. And I would give this one also 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, I agree. It was good. Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so
Life's Work.
Yeah, so next we have a really interesting documentary called The Life's Work, which took 15 years to make. And it's the story of a filmmaker who followed 4 individuals who were committed to lifelong commitments of projects that there's a good chance they might not even see them fulfilled or completed in their own lifetimes. But they take on these projects because they feel that they're necessary, they're important, they need to be done. If they don't do them, nobody else is going to do them. So we have 4 profiles in this film. We have the director of the SETI project, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. You have the founder of a program that's aimed at preserving lost, or presumed lost, Black gospel music recordings. You have a father and son who are committed to a preservation project for what they call legacy trees, in order to try and preserve their DNA so they can sort of repopulate the species. And you also have the story of an inspiring architect who is a big proponent of the concept of arcology, which is where architecture meets ecology as a way to redesign communities. And the film follows all 4 of these stories, examining not just what goes on in them, but also the challenges that they face in terms of being able to carry them out, the purpose of taking on a project that is going to constitute life's work, and being able to, inspire people to consider the same for themselves in whatever endeavors that they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's the legacy after, right? Who carries on? Who
exactly.
Inspired to carry on after you?
Exactly. And this is really a story about commitment and trying to encourage people to do that for themselves in their life. Goodness knows it's all too easy for people to throw in the towel these days.
Yeah.
And,
So disposable.
yeah, exactly. And this is saying, no, you can commit to something long term that's going to have a major impact on you as well as on the world at large. And if it's something that really piques your interest and your fascination, well, then why not do it? If you believe that strongly in what you're attempting to do, you will attract followers, you will attract support. And when your time comes at the end of your life, there will be other people who will step up and take over for you. That's most noticeably true with the architect who died in 2013. He had a whole group of followers who said, no, what he's doing here is important. We need to keep doing this. It's a model, not just for what we're doing in the town that we're constructing, but also something that other communities can draw from to make their communities more livable. And that's inspiring. I mean, I really like seeing stories like that, and you've got 4 of them put together in this one picture. And, even the people who are behind these projects admit we may never get results. I mean, the person who is the head of SETI says we may never get those radio telescope signals, providing us a clue that there's other individuals and other species out there who want to touch base with us. But is that any reason to stop? Why not keep looking? What's it going to hurt? We just might come across one of the biggest discoveries of humankind in a scientific context. So keep going. And those are really things I think that are important to, bolster people's imagination, their creativity, their gumption, their enthusiasm. I mean, they all really work together. And you've got 4 very compelling stories in this film all put together because the subject matter involved in each of them is so different.
Yeah, I wonder how they chose who they were going to put in their film.
Yeah, I mean, they really did a great job of that. I also like the fact that this film is very economical in the way it tells these stories. The movie is about an hour and a half. It does not go on way longer than it needs to, which unfortunately has been happening with a lot of documentaries these days. This gets in, gets out, tells the story and moves on. And it leaves a lasting impression in the process. So I recommend this one very highly, especially if you're looking for something.
Yeah, and you can get this one off of Apple, I think, and Amazon.
Yeah, and also from First Run Features from their streaming service. So I recommend this one very highly. I would give it 4 stars out of 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so next we have a movie from France called Black Box. And this is not necessarily the kind of film that we would ordinarily feature on here. It's a thriller. But the reason I chose it is because of one of the central themes that runs through the story. This involves the story of a airplane crash investigator who has a rather unorthodox way of working. When he's listening to the voice recorders from the cockpits of downed planes, he listens very intently to see if he can hear sounds in there that aren't necessarily readily available. And oftentimes that ends up leading him to the true cause of what caused the plane to go down. And in this case, a plane goes down and he's intentionally left out of the investigation, which just absolutely baffles him. He's like, why am I not included in this?
Being the guy.
Yeah, exactly. Especially since he's got this unique talent that sets him apart from the other investigators.
Yeah.
So what you find as you look back on some of the work he's done in the past is he works very intuitively. He listens with his ear very closely. And sure enough, that helps to verify what he's feeling in his gut for what might be the cause of what caused the plane to go down. Well, in this particular investigation, not long after it starts, his boss disappears. And the head of the agency that he works for says, well, we've got to have you in there. So we want you to take over and get involved again. And when he does, he ends up getting clues from the audio that don't correspond to what is believed to be the official cause of the crash. So he starts investigating it, and he comes up with some proposals that seem a little unorthodox and a little bit unusual, but all the evidence is pointing in the direction of what his gut is telling him. So he starts carrying it out, and as a result, he ends up getting involved in a really heavy-duty conspiracy involving a whole bunch of people, from the aircraft manufacturer to the government agency to even his own wife. And it tells a very compelling story that keeps you on the edge of your seat all the way through, all the way reinforcing this notion of, hey, you've got an intuition, it's there for a reason, listen to it.
Exactly.
And it's, for him, it's easy to do because it's worked so many times, but for so many people, they look upon intuition as something that's unreliable and faulty because it's not, quote unquote, rational or logical.
Yeah.
But this proves to be, the winning case for him in terms of investigating and studying this particular crash investigation. And I really like the way the film is put together because it gives you the clues in little drips and drabs and makes you wonder, okay, well, what does that mean? And then what does this mean? And then what does that mean? And it reminds me very much of the movies of people like Alfred Hitchcock or Brian De Palma or Roman Polanski. In fact, in particular, it reminded me a lot of the Roman Polanski film, The Ghostwriter, from, I believe, it was 2010. The film is put together very much in the same way as the way that story is told. And I love that picture. And this just held my interest for a long time, which is pretty interesting given the fact that this is a movie that's over 2 hours. Usually it's hard to maintain that sort of suspense for that long. But given the fact that you have the other elements working into this, things related to the intuition question, for example, it just makes it that much more layered in terms of the storytelling that it's presenting. Not to mention the fact that it's also beautifully filmed. It's got a great musical score. It's got terrific performances. This one, it played in the US in theaters for a very, very brief time back in 2022. And with very limited distribution.
I don't even remember hearing it come out.
No, I didn't either. I found out about this through an email from the distributor that's saying that it was now available for streaming and on home media. So that's how I ended up seeing it. And I was watching it and I got to the end and I said, why hasn't this film gotten wider attention? I mean, it really deserves it. I know that people don't necessarily think thriller and France in the same thought. That may have been something that worked against it. But I mean, this is as good as anything that Hollywood has done along that line. And then to have it give you more than just a suspenseful story in the process, I think is really what sold it for me. So I recommend this one highly. Go stream it or go buy the DVD. I mean, it's terrific. And I'm giving this one 4.5 out of 5 stars.
All right. Good stuff. We don't get 4.5 out of 5 too often.
No, but this one is, again, it's definitely worth it. So finally today we have a film. I guess you could call it sort of a preview of Pride Month. It's a documentary, which is actually kind of a misnomer in some ways because it's an unusual documentary called Framing Agnes. And this is a film that presents recreations of interviews of pioneers in the transgender community from the early 50s and 60s. It follows their story in a way that has not received a whole lot of attention over the years, but has started to become very prominent and important in recent years as the transgender community starts to become more visible. Basically, a lot of people historically sort of lumped the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community together. I would say almost out of convenience or laziness, simply because, well, they're all in outside the sexual mainstream, so we'll put them all together in one group, even though all 4 of them are very different from one another.
Yeah.
What's more, it may have worked well as a means to help secure civil rights and legal protections for people in those 4 communities, but again, they're all very different from one another. And it's something that I think a lot of people in the mainstream public are just beginning to realize at this point, even though these recreated interviews show these ideas have been there right from the very beginning.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk lately about the transgender community within the LGBTQ and that they should be removed and all kinds of stuff going on. What was interesting about this film is that everybody who starred in it was transgender.
Yes.
Everybody,
Yeah.
So that was really unique and different.
And the thing that I liked also is the fact that not only are you seeing them doing these recreated interviews with the pioneers, but there's also interviews with the actors out of character.
Yeah.
To get their impressions, to see what they felt about playing these characters and how they feel about where the transgender community is today.
Yeah. Like these archives were locked away for years and they finally came out of this vault. And they were like the script. I mean, they literally read that script, if you want to call it a script, or the interview, word for word. They're recreating the interview and talking, about this. And it was just fascinating, really.
Yeah.
And people felt in the 60s
and this material was believed lost too. I mean, they thought it was gone forever, and then they found it pretty much intact and said, wow, we've hit the jackpot here. So they used that material to do the recreations of the interviews. And also, as the movie plays out, they have commentary offered by a transgender community historian who offers her perspective on how things actually looked then and look now. Mm-hmm. And you get a really interesting, some really interesting ideas coming out of it that, for example, just because somebody is part of the T in LGBT does not necessarily mean that they're going to be gay after they have their transformation. I mean, they're switching genders, they're not switching orientations.
Right.
Yet everybody on the outside, and to a certain degree, even for a long time, a lot of people on the inside of the community just accepted that, like, oh yeah, I guess we're all part of this monolithic culture that's, thinking along the same lines, when that's far from true.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's unfortunate that there's so much, hoopla right now about it, and because of what they're doing in the schools and talking to these young children and, telling them about transgender and asking them, do you feel like a girl or a boy, and doing this, which is just so bizarre at this age with young children. I think, they haven't come into their sexuality. They don't know, or even maybe they know their gender. I guess they know their gender, but sometimes people just want to do things because it's cool,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And that's the danger.
Well, and the thing is, the youngest person who's interviewing these recreations, I believe, was in his mid-teens.
Yes.
And I mean, that's I think the earliest that you can realistically start talking about these kinds of issues and have it be anything meaningful. And it was interesting in his case too, in the fact that this was, again, going back to the 50s and 60s, where he had parents who were incredibly supportive.
Yeah, he came with his mom to the interview.
And they basically said, we want you to be happy. If this will make you happy, then we will look for the ways to get you the support that you need to make this possible. And now, if anybody's wondering why it's called Framing Agnes, that's because one of the pioneers was named Agnes, and she was someone whose name appeared repeatedly through the source material that they discovered. And she was somebody who was very clever in terms of the way she was able to get her procedures taken care of, because in those days, there were questions about whether it was even legal to do that, let alone to actually carry it out. And she managed to sort of work her way into the system to get what she needed. And then after she had what she needed, she vanished. She just said, okay, I've got what I need. I'm going to go, I'm going to go live my life now. Thanks for the help. See you later.
Yeah.
And it was very important to her because she didn't want to lead the kind of life that was led, unfortunately, in some ways, by Christine Jorgensen.
Yeah.
Was one of the first notable transgender individuals to have the procedural work done. She wanted to have a simple, quiet life afterward, but when she arrived in New York from Europe, where she had the surgeries done, she suddenly became like this media celebrity, and her life was characterized by sensationalism and titillation and all that after that. And that's not really the life she wanted to live, but well, at least she brought the subject above board. for
Yeah,
people to
I think
start
that the
addressing.
one other really interesting part was, with the African American woman who had, been a male and lived life as a female, and how her experiences was so different from everybody else's, only because of the racial divide. Plus, and yet what I found interesting is that they all found partners, whether they had surgery or
Yeah.
not. They all had husbands and wives that accepted them and loved them, and they lived their lives as with a partner. So that was really interesting too.
Yeah, in her case, I mean, she very much brought to the surface the fact that, well, not only am I dealing with the issues of being transgender, but I'm also having to deal with the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And, it was sort of a double challenge for her to wrestle with both of these considerations. And that's something that like nobody ever really thought of.
Yeah.
Even more recently, I would say that they would look at it and say, gee, they're having to deal with the same sort of everyday issues.
Yeah, she walked down the street.
Us.
She's getting picked up as a streetwalker, taken to jail, obviously gets stripped, and then they find out she's a guy. And even though she's a girl, she got plumbing of a guy, and like there's a double whammy there.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was really unfortunate.
This was a really interesting film in terms of not just the content, but also the way it's put together, in terms of the different elements of presenting the story. And on top of that, it's another film that, like A Life's Work, is very economically made in terms of timing. I believe it was only about an hour and 15 minutes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
but it moves by at a very brisk, no nonsense kind of pace, and you end up coming away from it with a lot to think about that you might not have previously considered going in. So this is I think an important film, in addition to being a good film, because it's really opening the eyes of the public to what's going on. The
historian, she didn't want to do it because she didn't want to face it in her own life, which was interesting.
Yeah.
Exactly. Don't I? She'd be a fascinating person to talk to.
and all 6 of the characters who they feature as the pioneers are fascinating. I mean, they're all very different from one another. You get very different stories in terms of a guy who had been hanging around in gay bars all his life and really wasn't gay. And, it's like, what do I do with this now?
Yeah.
So, I like this one a lot. I definitely give this one 4 stars out of 5.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I really liked it a lot too.
And it's available for streaming on the Kino Now streaming service. So give it a look, especially with Pride Month coming up.
Yeah. All right.
So it's really good to see these films were out there to help fill the gap in the time since the end of award season. We're going to be coming into the start of summer blockbuster season shortly. Looks like there's some promising material there. We'll see. But in the meantime, if you're not looking for anything along those lines, you want something a bit more thoughtful, consider any one of these 5 films. I mean, these are all top notch.
I agree. You have some good viewing, you guys.
Yeah, because actually, I mean, the pickings are in the theaters right now. Otherwise, are pretty slim. I mean, I've looked at what's been released recently, and I look at what's being released over the next few weeks. And honestly, it's like, well, I guess if I've got nothing else to do, we'll think about it then. But exactly. These are good. There are some other interesting streaming items that are coming out over the next month too. So I look forward to seeing those. And we'll talk about some of those next time.
All right. Well, goodbye, Facebook.
Everyone, take care.
Next month.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right.